There's somebody sitting there. There.
All right, good morning, everybody. It's 11 o'clock and we're here at the Port of Newport. I'm saying this basically for the benefit of anybody who's joining us online as well. To have a work session on the Siletz rules project. I'm going to turn it over to Alan Hansen, and he's going to start a presentation about the process today.
All right, thank you, Chair Jackson. So my name's Alan Hansen. I think I've got all of you at various times through this process. So I'll just kind of go with an overview of what we're doing today. Today is a board work session. So this is an invitation only event, so to speak. So the board's requested 3 participants. Those are the Siletz Anglers Association, Federated Tribes of the Siletz Indians, and Oregon Department of Wildlife. Each group will have 30 minutes to present any information they think is appropriate to the board. That includes the opportunity for the board to ask questions. It'll be essentially a 30-minute conversation. And that conversation is between the people at the table and the board. So it's not about audience participation. The invited participants will have the opportunity to present any information you want with the board. If you have materials to leave with the board, they can accept them throughout this process. Is there any questions on format while we're here? Okay.
One thing I'd like to point out for the folks who are invited speakers, you'll notice that there's a underneath that's Dax Messett. He's another board member who was unable to be present here today, but he is paying attention to this meeting. So you are talking to him as well as the 3 of us who are present physically.
So let's see here.
It's not already.
Oh, there.
He's waving, I'll be the remote. No, you're good.
So what we're discussing, the purpose of today's last board meeting, the board approved a set of proposed rules. The proposed rules is that boats with motors of 15 horsepower or less can operate between Jack Morgan Park and the old mill boat ramp. Above that section is non-motorized, and all tributaries above Jack Morgan are closed to motors. And the actual rule language is on the slide if somebody wants to take a look, or if you're interested, take a look at that. Thanks, Larry. So where we are today, as I said, at the April 23rd board meeting, the board approved the proposed rules. And so we're currently in a written comment period, and the written comment period lasts till July 20th. For those who are keeping close track of this, originally we came out with a rule notice and said that written comment period is open till June 30th. So we filed an amended rule notice at the board meeting and also at the public hearing. We heard from a lot of people saying the fiscal impact statement was inappropriate. And so we revised that and we filed an additional rule notice. And what that revision is we had originally stated that there was no fiscal impact, and a lot of people took exception with that. And so what we did is we broke it out and said, yes, there is a fiscal impact amongst guys. Specifically the motorized guys are limited to a section of the river. And as the kind of stated, that some of them could lose approximately 20 to 30% of their seasonal income. But we also recognize that there's non-motorized guys that will likely come in and take the place of the motorized guys that are no longer able to use. And we didn't hear any indication that the number of people fishing the river would probably change. The guys they use would likely change, the method in which they're fishing would likely change, but ultimately, we don't see a significant fiscal impact in the area. Yes, individuals will be impacted, but from a broad perspective, we don't anticipate a significant fiscal impact. Also back to our rule process, we held a public hearing on May 21st. We're having a work session today. And work session again is for invited guests only. At 3 o'clock today in this same location, we will have a board public comment session, and that will be conducted similar to the work session, public hearing we held on May 21st. Oh, it went.
You think upside down?
I got it. Okay.
You want to go up one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I can barely see it from here. So the next steps, our next board meeting is July 30th. What my role will be is provide the board with a summary of where we are today. That will include summarizing all the written comments we received, providing a summary of the testimony from the public hearing, also provide a summary of the work session and the 3 o'clock public hearing. There will be an opportunity for a final vote on the rules at that July 30th board meeting. If the board approves the final rule, that will go into effect shortly thereafter. The board could choose to make modifications. If the board chooses to make modifications, depending on the extent of those modifications, we may have to go another round of public hearings if they're significant, or we could just move it to the final vote at the September board meeting. Obviously, we don't know until we hear all the testimony if there will be any modifications or not. But as of today, we are scheduling the first opportunity for a final vote in July 30th. It went. And what the process will look like. So if the board does approve the final rule, the rule will go into effect. We will file the rule with the Secretary of State. We'll also update signage at all impacted voting facilities. We'll also use all of our media channels to broadcast the new rule. So our goal is to make sure every impacted party is aware of the rule change. Enforcement will be done through the Lincoln County Sheriff and Marine Patrol and Oregon State Police. Finally, I think this is relatively new with the board. We're conducting annual or a one-year review of the rule process. And what we're looking at is trying to understand if the Marine Board staff did their job of making sure that we effectively communicated and what that would look like. Like I said, the signage, but focusing on voter education and compliance. If there's an issue, the board will have an opportunity to provide suggestions on ways we can improve the implementation process. We need to do additional steps to implement the process. It is not an opportunity for the board to change the rule. If the board wants to change the rule, we would have to open formal rulemaking sessions, full rulemaking process. So we had some confusion in the past on what the annual or one-year review was. And we got a lot of input to say, we don't like the rule, we need to change it. This is not the opportunity, or this will not be discussed at that board meeting. Other than if the board thinks the rule needs to change, then they would direct staff to open up the rulemaking process. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's what I have prepared. If anybody has any questions for me, I'm happy to answer those. Or during a break, I'm happy to answer any questions anybody may have. Otherwise, I will turn it back to the chair.
Janine, did you have anything to add to the presentation?
To Alan's portion, no, I have a presentation about the grant programs and grant investment in this area.
Do you want to do that now?
They're just waiting for the presentation to get.
Yeah.
Up there. So for the record, I'm Janine Bullock. I'm a voting facilities program manager and agency tribal liaison. So there's been a lot of interest in what has happened on the Siletz River between Moonshine Park and Jack Morgan Park. So I put together some slides to give you some information about voting investment that we've made, as well as conversations and work we're doing on some potential future improvements. So we're going to start on the upstream end at Moonshine Park. So you'll see an aerial, and you'll see some existing conditions. So we have not provided any grant funds to Lincoln County previously, but we have had some discussions. They are a couple years old. They have at the time, it was a new parks director. We met out on site to really talk about some of the things we're hearing and seeing. The photo on the bottom right, where you see kind of the trees, there's an inside channel, and boats will often get sucked into that inside channel, which is unsafe versus going out. And you can see kind of the break where there's flat water in that photo. So we've had discussions. Both us and ODF&W have received complaints and concerns voiced by voters about this launch location. But at the time, this time, the county is not in a position to do anything. And so it is going to be in this condition until they are prepared to make some investments out of that site. So the next one is Twin Bridges. So we have provided some funding, and the funding in this is all from our motorized funds. Most of these improvements are well before the Waterway Access Grant Program came into being. And so we're talking about motorized money investment. So we provided a vault toilet in partnership with the county, and the county hasn't identified needs, but we have heard from voters. From the photos, you can see the boat ramp is not in the greatest condition, and the parking area needs to have some improvements. Oops. Okay, so now we're at key liquid. This is one where we also haven't provided any grant funding. And the city hasn't mentioned any needs. But as you can see, the bottom of the boat ramp is undermined, it's short. So making some repairs to the boat ramp, if nothing else, to reinforce it so it doesn't crack and break and creates future. That is a city park. And then
I was gonna say, Janine, if you wouldn't mind, just remind, they went on the board tour back a ways, just remind them that where geographically they're at on those and jog their memory from their tour.
yeah, so PPW is at the beginning of town, if you are coming downstream from Moonshine. And then your next site, which will be Mill Park, that's on the other kind of end of that town loop that you will hear about. So we provided a few different grants on this one. And then you'll note that we have spent some resources to do some hydraulic analysis and geotechnical evaluations. That is a mixture of non-motorized or waterway access grants, as well as motorized funds, based on the use that is happening at the site. And there's been a lot of work that has gone into this site. The city had applied for a grant during the 21-23 biennium. There were no permits in hand. There needed to be some engineering in order to get through that process. And so the board supported staff recommendation to defer it, and also directed staff to work with the city toward these improvements. So we have been working with the city, and we've had an on-site meeting with competitor tribes of the Siletz Indians on site with staff to talk about the proposed improvements and doing what we need to do. We've had some consultation with tribal representatives for those improvements. The city's also hosted public meetings and solicited comment on design concepts. And then staff presented at their work session because the geotechnical evaluation identified that the middle bench property cannot be developed. So Mill Park, as a reminder, you have this upper level gravel parking, you have a middle area is kind of grass, and you have this lower level, which is parking in the boat ramp. It's kind of a 3-tier piece. And so we have been doing work. When this process started, we notified the city that we are going to slow down because I don't know what pot of money to make any future improvements in. And if the board supports the petition that's submitted, staff will work with the city through our waterway access grant program from non-motorized voters to help make improvements. If staff goes forward with, or if the board goes forward with staff recommendation to draw a line at this park, it could be a combination of funding. But wherever that happens, the grant program shouldn't dictate the board's decision.
That site, the road going into that site.
That
It's
is,
pretty rough shape from what I remember from visiting it.
it is in rough shape, and that's why we had the geotechnical evaluation done. This is an old slide area. And the report gives some very specific information on how to remedy the fact that this has been an ongoing process.
The city, I don't know what's their, touch on this so far, but what's their financial capacity to meet that requirements? Some of this stuff.
The city does not have a lot of money. And they are going to be looking at ways to leverage in-kind labor, other grant programs, other resources. And as the board knows, we work with a lot of different programs and different partners to help put the pieces together to make something successful. The city is aware that there will be some impact, but they don't have the capacity to match a full 25%. But I think there's opportunities out there for some partnerships to help that. And then Odralla Bridge. So we provided 3 grants. The first one was actually a grant directly to Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife for the property acquisition back in the 80s. And, oops, sorry, I didn't hear you touching that. And then we've provided 2 subsequent grants to actually Lincoln County, who operates this location. So it is a pole slide. And it gets used. There's really not any improvement needs identified by the county. There is some wear, so there's some maintenance things that could be done on some of the boards and the roller at the top where ropes have dug some channels into it. On being pulled up and lowered down. And then we're at Jack Morgan. So we've had a couple different grants at this location. This is a site that is operated by Lincoln County. And the county hasn't identified any needs, but we've heard from voters that the boat ramp could use some repair, the gravel parking to be regraded and gravel. But pretty minor items overall for it. So grant funding, I use the numbers from this current biennium. So our boating facility grant program is motorized pot. We have about $4.2 million. And then the waterway access grant, which is our non-motorized money paid by voters who purchase the waterway access permit. We have about 1.9 that is awarded out through various grant applications that the board sees. Both of these programs are oversubscribed and they are competitive. As the board knows through previous grant review processes, there are times where projects have to be phased to fit within financial constraints, phased to work around permit applications, and then of course phased because we don't have the resources to do this. This last grant cycle was a tough one. The board deferred the majority of grant applications because of funding. In this case, all of the sites between Moonshine Park and Jack Morgan are either owned and operated or operated either by Lincoln County or the city of Siletz. Both of them are eligible applicants for our grant programs. They both are in good standing and would be encouraged to apply to make improvements. When we determine what type of money we're using, so what type of boat use, not activity, but boat use, if there is a rule in place, that for us is a very hard line as to what type of money we're doing. When there isn't a rule in place that says it is either a motorized site or a non-motorized site, we utilize a lot of resources. We talk to our partners at Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife on their observations. We talk to the land managing agency on what are their observations. We rely on staff inspections of what we have noticed and observed. And if the information is still have gaps, we will reach out to boating clubs, organizations, civic groups, others who will have a firsthand knowledge to help inform what is that percentage that we should look at for those splits. And then moving on to that, we have our maintenance program. So Lincoln County currently does receive maintenance assistance for the sites that they have, which is Jack Morgan, Ojala, and Twin Bridges. And it's about $25,500 roughly per biennium that we provide as assistance to augment some maintenance at those sites. The city of Siletz is currently not receiving maintenance assistance funding for either Key or Mill Park. So there's those pieces. Does the board have questions on this?
Is there anything in rule that would give us flexibility on that requirement for a small city that doesn't have the ability to generate natural?
Yeah, our targeted minimum match is 25%. In cases of extreme financial hardship, the board can accept less. And in the past, the board has done that in situations where the project may not qualify or may score poorly for other programs that we're aware of that are normal matching resources. But yes, the board has flexibility on that. So I just wanted to show this. This is the design concept that was supported by the city to go forward for Mill Park. They will be fixing that access road, fixing the lower roundabout, and then adding a toilet, immediate parking, accessible path, and the boat ramp. So as part of our standard process, we look at accessibility and removing barriers for people who have physical limitations, which is why we have the routes, the parking, the restroom to meet those demands. Boat ramps themselves are exempt because a boat needs a certain slope to be able to float effectively off of trailers. And so it will never be like what people would expect for a sidewalk slope, right? So we do remove as many barriers as we can to help people get into those situations and be able to get in and out of the water. And then it included these because Mill Park and Key they're off in the town loop. And it's because on the water there's a distance, but on land they're a relatively short piece. So I just did a Google Earth. The city of Siletz has done some parking gravel areas where they allow people to park around the sport fields, City Hall. And so in this place, going from Mill to that overflow parking area the city allows, it's about an 11-minute walk. And then from Key to that same area, you're looking about a 7 to 8 minute walk. So just to kind of give you an idea that there is a central area that is used for overflow to help tie in that townwood piece. So the sites are small, there is limited parking at them. This is a way that the city has worked to help meet that parking demand, is to create some areas and allow it. Does the board have any questions?
I have one question about the the regular maintenance that the city is receiving.
Mhm.
Is that planned, it's, biennium, but at the same time, is there an end date on that maintenance or is it?
Yeah, so our contracts for every 2 years. It goes from July 1st at the start of the biennium and ends on June 30th, the end of the biennium. And the funding is not meant to replace the routine and ordinary maintenance, really meant to augment, to help further protect further investment that you make on the capital side. So we are one of the, to my knowledge, we are one of 2 states in the nation who provide maintenance to help with the investment that they spend during the capital. And the maintenance is like routine and ordinary, cleaning the bathrooms, restocking them, taking care of your vegetation, like parking lots. And as the board knows from previous meetings, the maintenance funds we have are not keeping track of inflation. They're able to buy less and help with the networks we said to the case.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
To clarify, the county, the county takes the city. The reason they're not involved in that program?
So Mill Park currently does not qualify, because of the non-designated trailer parking and the space to meet the minimums. Illicky, currently may, I believe the city does have striped out trailer spaces, but previously they had been everything striped for single cars. So it is potential the city could qualify for BBOD now, but they just haven't.
So question for Janine, and you may not know the answer, so feel free to tell me. We designed all of our sites to be 0% accessible.
Yes.
You guys are amazing about that, designing those partners. That's awesome. In reading through the public comments, there's a lot of comments about river segments needing to be accessible. And ensuring that folks have equal access. I've never heard that come to home discussion. Are you aware of any requirement that, rules that we make, that if they do or don't affect that, that's a violation of their anything? I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, as I definitely mentioned, right? We have no grant investment there. We are not providing any maintenance. There is requirements that if the county was to do some upgrades, that they would need to make some things compliant, right? But I also mentioned that boating has many exemptions associated with slope. When the U.S. Access Board approved these guidelines and they were codified, there was that exemption because a boat has to have a slope to float off the trailer, otherwise the tow vehicle becomes partially submerged. So recognizing that is compliant because it is exempted. The biggest parts are making sure that you have accessible parking, sanitation, accessible routes, at least to the top of the program. But for sites that are not being improved, there is not a requirement to bring them up to current standards.
The accessibility design guide applied to it. So
Yes, yes, not on one back.
We have one other quick question. I'm trying to think back when we did our tour. Can you remind me if there are some sites that you have to either pay for parking, whether it be the city or state, or?
They all are currently free.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Thank you very much.
So that concludes the staff portion of our work session. The first group that we've invited to speak with us is the Siletz Anglers Association. So I think we're gonna invite you to sit here. And introduce yourselves.
Ready for a start? I'm gonna go first.
Before you-
Sorry, Frank Sheely.
Okay, yeah, if you guys can just run.
No problem. We're the Siletz Angler Association. We do have 3 members of our board that are currently in Alaska. Since this time of year, it's very common for them to be out of state. I'm Scott Ammerman.
Logan Ellis. Michael Kelly. There you go.
I'm gonna give a little bit of history, an overview of this before these guys can even be of it. In 2009, the petition was started with the OSMB to ban all motors above Jack Morgan Park. At that time, the Siletz tribe graciously invited us to their lead building for a family-style dinner with both sides to discuss the petition. At that time, the tribe told us that they didn't really have an opinion one way or the other. They just wanted to facilitate the community getting along. Scott and I were both at that dinner. At that time, we offered a compromise of a 25 horsepower limit above Jack Morgan Park. The anti-motor people refused to budge, and because of that Marine Board decided to leave the rule the way it was. The Marine Board also offered up a no motor rule from Key Park, which we've been talking about, down to the watering tanks, about a half mile down the river. Thinking that would take care of the drinking water concerns that they had. That was also refused. Scott, Michael, and I were for several years members of the Siletz Watershed Council. And that experience led us to start the Siletz Anglers Association. Our main goal was to develop a community of current river users to make a better experience for future river users that included safer boat ramps, sport fishing center. SAA has helped us to organize and pay for boat ramp upgrades, hatchery upgrades and repairs, clear steelhead, broodstock collection equipment, river cleanups, building relationships to the city of Siletz, a flag table, running water, PEOE, and much more. Just last month, we cut a check to the city of Siletz for $50,000 to help stabilize the driveway. Well, no, that's what we were just talking about. That they don't have a lot of money, but they think they have a plan in place. They were about 50,000 short. We were able to come up with it. We recently offered Lincoln County $100,000 for its moonshine program. I don't think we're very close to that yet, but we're working. During all this, we've eagerly worked with the tribe, offering the volunteers and money to keep the rock. Dan Vanderwedding was coming to our SA meetings and fundraisers. When the petition came out, we all immediately reached out to the tribe, hoping to solve this within our community. I say all this because we thought we're doing a good job of making a healthy relationships with the tribe. The petition, frankly, just blindsided us. We have always desired a good relationship with the tribe and are begging to come up with some sort of compromise with them to get back to working together on making the river a better place for all.
So we are, kind of, we're the ones that are out there, the advocates for the river that are out there promoting getting more fish and more access for all users. And so we see how that benefits all. We fought for a long period of time to rebuild our coho runs, and you'll hear the F&W in a little bit talk about that. You can hand that around. This is some statistics on our coho through ocean harvest reform and habitat restoration. We rebuilt our coho runs. When I started guiding there over 30 years ago, it wasn't uncommon for me to go an entire season with never catching a coho. Shortly after the rule was implemented in 2000, after 87, where they banned jets, the coho run hit an all-time low on the Siletz of only 207. That was how many we had returning and spawning. Through ocean harvest reform, habitat restoration, and fighting for these fish, we've rebuilt the run. The last 12 years, we had 33,000 coho. Hear a lot of people talk about how there's no fish anymore. The motors are killing the fish, but yet during these time periods, our fish have rebounded or doing great. Last year we had, which is the last year that I have the records for, was 2004, 2024. We had 14,500 coho return as an estimated spawn statement on this Siletz. That's 337% of maximum seating capacity. How many we need to have all the fry that'll survive for summer over the time period that can live in that river for smolt production. We've done a lot of work with the Pacific Salmon Treaty. We've reached out to the tribe for years, trying to get them more involved in the Pacific Salmon Treaty, because that's our limiting factor on our Chinooks. Our Chinooks, the Pacific Salmon Treaty only wants 4,200 Chinooks returning to the Siletz. We fought for 15 years to be out there, to be the group that's fighting for more Chinooks to come back to the Siletz. We're the ones that are out there trying to get these fish, but it's a limiting factor. We have to go against Canada and against Alaska. So this is a huge agency. Like, I mean, I work with 3 different nonprofits. I'm on the board of 2. This is our biggest focus and our biggest concern. And we've talked to the tribe about, you know, being this, and the tribes are huge advocates for getting that change done too. We have worked, like you guys talked about the boat ramps. We've worked with 4 of the different boat ramp projects in the town. Grants that we just gave 50,000 to the town of Siletz. We've been on the ground and they're cleaning the brush, doing the different things. You guys talked about how Morgan Park needed re-graveling and some boat ramp repairs. We did those. We went in and re-gravelled the parking lot, filled in all the holes, one boat ramp, moved some boulders that had got out on the ramp, that kind of stuff. We offered $100,000 to Lincoln County Parks to start the moonshine project, because we know they need matching funds. And we went in there when they said it was going to be a while. We went in and looked and explored an option of putting in a temporary slide above where the current ramp is so people could safely launch. In addition to those, we're also working on Illahee. We've done working in the park at Illahee. We did park at Old Mill. We're currently also trying to do boat ramp expansion at Logston, because we used to have a boat ramp at Logston that got taken away. And we have had some state marine board hearings and meetings on that to discuss the possibility of getting that back open. But what we fear is if you take away motor use in this area, that we won't get grant funding. At the April meeting, you guys sat there and listened to them talk about how every grant that was funded had motor use tied to it. And every grant that was a request that had no motor use in the area got denied or deferred. So our fear is if you take away our motors, that we will lose the ability to fund a lot of the projects we're doing. And getting more fish back to the Siletz provides fish for all. This getting more access provides more access for everybody. We're trying to encourage more people to use the river, and then that turns around and gives more funding to the state marine board, because you're getting more gas tax, you're getting more boat registrations. So I'm gonna hand it off to Logan. He's gonna talk about our winter steelhead, and then if you guys have questions.
So winter steelhead on the Siletz is typically December through March, which is the busiest time for users on the river. During that time, the only fish we're allowed to harvest are hatchery. All wild fish must be released or kept alive for the stock program in live well tanks. The Siletz gets 50,000 winter steelhead smolts compared to nearby rivers like the Alsea, Wilson, and Nestucca that get 150,000. The SAA has funded projects with ODFW and offered to fund more hatchery smolts for the Siletz. We rebuilt and cleaned out the acclimation smolt ponds at Palmer Creek and ground the road into there so the smolts have better survival rate going out into the river. The broodstock program consists of angler caught wild steelhead and kept in live well tanks in our boats. And those drop points for those fish are at Twin Bridges and Illahee, where the cage is in the water at the boat ramp. Those cages are hard to work with. They have a small coin slot in them, and they also have to be monitored. So when the river comes up or down, they kind of float around. SA has offered ODFW to fund an above ground holding tank at Illahee Park for those wild steelhead instead of the cages in the river. That don't have to be checked as often or monitored. We've also worked for another, that holding tank will also work for an acclimation site for smolts as well, other than Palmer Creek. We have been working successfully with the city of Siletz and they have offered us property in Illahee Park to place that holding tank. SA has also funded the batteries for broodstock collectors to be able to run the aerators in the live well tanks. This past season, I contributed 37 wild steel to the broodstock program. The goal set by ODFW is 40 females and 40 males, 80 total. I contributed nearly half of the fish for this season. I could not have done that without my motor. I take 3 clients plus myself, then had the live well tank full of water and fish, which adds about another 100 pounds. It's physically too much to row that whole day, every day of the season. I fished over 60 days this last winter. I don't collect these fish for self-enjoyment. I collect the broodstock because I want to keep the hatchery program going and provide hatchery fish for all. The tribe releases about 5,000 hatchery steel smolts from their hatchery. Those hatchery fish come from the broodstock fish we collect. Every broodstock collector that I know of runs a motor on their boat. The drop cage at Illy Park is actually below the boat ramp. And so when we go to drop the fish off, we have to go below the ramp, drop the fish off, and then motor back up to the ramp. If you take motors away, it's going to be hard to do that. And then also, if motors are taken away, I see the broodstock collection will start to suffer. With that being said, the real problem during the winter season isn't motors. We need to get more hatchery smolts planted in the river to be consistent with nearby rivers. The ODFW Halsey hatchery has failed 5 times in the years between 2012 and 2024 to get a full 50,000 scaled smolts in the river. That's because they died at the hatchery. If we get 150,000 smolts planted like nearby rivers, there'll be way more fish for all users, less competition for fewer fish. This is the #1 project that SA is trying to work on, is get more fish in the river for the winter stud. And that would enjoy, have everyone else enjoy catching more fish, be happier, and not complain on ways how motors are impacting the fish. And then Mike's gonna be up next, he's gonna talk about some facilities.
So, in the 2 options that you guys had presented on the board earlier, we talked about the one deadline for the motor use being in Old Mill Park. We feel like that is a bad option for the deadline for several reasons. As noted, Mill Park at this moment has a very unstable road accessing the boat ramp. A number of vehicles have gone into the river, one of which is still in the river due to the steepness of the ramp and the severe drop off at the bottom of the ramp. Old Mill site has no parking close to the ramp, no bathrooms, no handicap parking, no overflow parking, and isn't ADA friendly at all. Not sure what kind of stress the overflow parking in this facility could create in the surrounding neighborhood. And Oregon State Marine Corps would be creating a new deadline in the river without any visible landmarks. We feel, SAA feels like Illahee would be a more logical location for several reasons. It currently already has handicap parking and overall about 3 times more parking spaces compared to Mill Park. It has permanent bathrooms, much better lighting and much better staging areas, a much safer and wider boat ramp. And Illahee is a lot easier to find and locate, as Mill Park is kind of tricky because it's tucked in behind a bunch of houses in a neighborhood. So it's not really that easily found. Illahee is right over the bridge as everybody comes into town. There's signage and you pass it. It is also another very nice convenience. It is already the natural deadline for the fall Chinook regulations that everybody's aware of. So it would be a lot less confusing, and it would just be the deadline for motors and for the Chinook regulations, gas laws, I should say. We have worked with the city of Siletz to come up with overflow parking for Illahee boat ramp. Which was also mentioned behind the sports fields. So using Illahee as the deadline would use those existing river deadlines. It has a bridge, which is a natural landmark that is real visible and easy to tell, as I also mentioned. It has the bathrooms, the handicap parking, way more ADA compliant. is just safer for the community and won't put added stress on the community during busy seasons. We also strongly encourage the staff to go check out both of those facilities now that we've further along in this process. And we're kind of have an idea of like what could be these possible options. But we encourage you guys to go and look at it again to see for yourself and just say like what would make more sense, right? As this, I mean, our hope is that Mill Park can get improved down the road. But right now, we know that that's not anywhere in the very near future. So at the moment, Illahee is that option. And that's Scott.
So as Mike was saying, we had a problem in the community where people were overflow parking out on the main street, which was blocking public access to the library. A lot of people in the community pull up and park out in front of the library. When they pull up and park out in front of the library, they park there. So they reached out to us and we came up with a solution of parking fields that you were talking about. That was Siletz anglers driven with the community. I just handed out a copy of this. I didn't send the whole thing, Jim, you need all 31 pages, but this is the pamphlet made by the Marine Board when they restricted motor use in 87 to no jets and no jets throughout the entire thing. You will see that I highlighted one of the sections. Again, Jen got a copy of this, so I'm sure she can get a copy of this for everybody, or I can write it if you wanted. The highlighted section basically says, above that, it talks about why we have prop motors in the river and why prop motors are important for the river. And it said that at some point, prop motors may become an issue. And if prop motors become an issue, their recommendation was the first restriction should be to have a horsepower limit as a recommendation. So what we did is as we said earlier, we've talked to everybody in the community that's going to sit down and talk to us. We've talked to anti-motor people, we've talked to tribal people, we've talked to other tribes. So other tribes have claims to the Siletz too, or so they say. We have talked to pro-motor and anti-motor people, and we've came up with 2 possible community-driven compromises for motor use. And the first one would be, as outlined in this packet, where they said, restrict motor use to 15 horsepower. And if you restricted motor use above more than 15 horsepower, it would limit the larger high-speed boats, such as the one I run. And it would be, that was the #1 complaint during the RAC process. It was the #1 complaint was high-speed large boats. We remove those. It would allow ADA access and access to all users. It would follow the Oregon State Marine Board guidelines. We got minimal financial impact on the local businesses, and it would maintain funding for the projects we're trying to do, and it would maintain revenue for the State Marine Board. You wouldn't be taking away motor usage, boat registrations. So, which is important since you're 5.7 million in deficit this biennium, like funding's big. Option 2 would be that we allow 15 horsepower motors between Morgan and Illahee, and then we allow electrics above Illahee. I don't know why through this entire process electric motors haven't been talked about. And Tillamook on Wilson and the Trask, we have motor zones, and above those we have electric only zones. And electrics are generally, and that's what I put in there, we should have some worry about being a 36-volt system. Because every time it was brought up during the process, Alan pointed out that the record for electric motors is 117 miles an hour. Well, that's not how we're using. We're using small 1 to 3 horsepower electric motors to maintain getting down the river, to move through the frog ponds. It provides access to all users. And there's no reason to not have electric. And there's no biological reason. Nobody's hitting the ground, nobody's hitting anything. And you can see all the points there as to why electric would be great. It maintains funding, maintains our option to get funding for these boat ramp projects we're trying to do, and that kind of thing. So we welcome any questions you have and encourage to.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna start. So I just want to clarify something you just said, because I'm not all that familiar with outboard motors and electric versus gas. So when you say the 36 volt or smaller, you're saying that would be comparable to like a 1 to 3 horsepower engine?
Yes, I think that a 36 volt is the equivalent of 3 horsepower electric. So they're small, they're handheld, they sit on the back.
Okay, and then I just want to thank Logan for your description about the broodstock program, because I keep hearing about people participating in that, and I understand at a big picture what it is, but the actual mechanics of the hauling, catching the fish, hauling the fish, and having to get them to a location for use in that program. So I really appreciate hearing a little bit more of the details of that process. Anybody have some more questions?
I actually had a question following up on that note. Logan, can you remind us all, especially me, where you need to drop off broodstock once they're collected? Because you did mention that when you spoke, but.
There's two drop points. One's at Twin Bridges, just right next to the boat ramp, and the other is at Italy, kind of below the boat ramp, is in fact below the fast turn.
Okay.
And so, like I said, there's no way you can drop the fish off and row back up. The water's too fast right there. So that's why we have to have motors to motor back up to the ramp. Yeah, there's no room for the cage right at the boat ramp.
Nobody FW will talk during their presentation about the cages and that kind of stuff, but these are the fish that are caught for 4 or 5 month period in the Siletz that are the only fish that are going to get taken home. You know, the brood stocks we collect, like Logan said, are the same eggs and the same hatchery fish that the tribe is doing. We worked with the tribe for years trying to get a travel hatchery up. We've petitioned state and marine board at least 10 times and even offered to pay for up to additional 150,000, up to 150,000 smolts. There'd be more fish for all. But since they killed our fish at the hatcheries, 5 years, the 5 years they killed our fish at hatcheries, that affects 2 years returns. So like a 10 years of a 13-year period, we weren't getting full returns of the 50,000, while all the surrounding streams getting 100. So it's just, we have very few fish returning. So because you have few fish returning, it creates competition for who's catching that fish versus lots of fish for all. And that's our main focus of the Siletz. Trying to get more fish for everybody.
I do have one other question, and this will be a question that I'll later ask the tribes as well. Looking at Illahee versus Old Mill, and that is like Illahee being more in the central of town, the tribal headquarters being there as well. Do you think that that would be like too congested if that became the designation line, or is it better suited to accommodate everybody?
No, I mean, it's clearly the better facility. It's already the natural meeting place, like anyone fishes the Siletz in the winter, everybody meets there in the morning. Like I said, they have the bathrooms there. It's a lot better parking. There's handicap parking. And it's just like you come into town and you cross the bridge, it's right there. Mill Park. I mean, it's hard to even describe to how to get to Mill Park to your guys.
So we'd love for you to go look at it again and walk up from the boat ramp up to where parking is up at the top. It's even young, fit people like Logan, they're gonna get winded by the time they walk up to the top. So we feel like Illahee would be way better because we've already worked with the city, we've worked with the community on creating an overflow lot. And for us, I would say the overflow walk is about 2 minutes to the overflow parking lot from the thing. And it is about an 11-minute walk from one side of town to the other. So we had a lot of people that would park, they'd park halfway across town. So that way they could park the walk halfway at first, halfway at the end. But that also is putting it right in front of local businesses, right in front of the library. A lot of people pull up in front of the library to use the Wi-Fi, that kind of thing. So they reached out to us and said, hey, is there something we can do? So we talked to the local shuttle people in the community. We talked to all the local fishing people. We posted on our social media accounts saying, please don't park on the main street. Here's the overflow lot. Shuttle people know to park there. People know there's signs that say, if your car is not here, it's going to be in this lot. So we've already created this. There's nothing like that at Old Mill. We encourage you to look at it. Like Mike said, there's one vehicle that's still stuck in there and that person died. And they found the body in there. And that car is still stuck below, the boat ramp. We lost city work truck. I've got pictures of it. I'll email those in. It went off the end of the ramp trying to clean the ramp. It's just a very steep, it's like the edge of this desk. You go over the end of that, you're getting sucked out in the river. So it's not a viable boat ramp. And it's certainly not handicapped. So that's why we're trying to create a new boat ramp there that will be accessed for the kayakers in the summer months. I personally watched 3 or 4 different kayakers and canoe people try to launch off that ramp and step into their kayak or their canoe and instantly fall. So we're trying to build a much wider boat ramp that extends in there. So these are all projects we're currently doing that we're worried we'll lose funding on.
It's also all mud, so there's no, Illahee all concrete paved. To go down the middle part, the only part that's paved is the road end, but the two parking areas are all gravel and muddy, potholes, puddles. Gets to be kind of a mess. There's quite often, riffraffy people hanging back in there because there's no lighting and it's real tucked away, so I've had people express safety concerns back there, just feeling safe.
For years, we couldn't park in the lower turnaround because your vehicle is gonna get vandalized. And so we cut out all the brush and opened it up so it was more viewable from the top, so we did stuff, but they talked about parking being down the boat ramp. That's a boat turnaround, so you can turn around and back down the ramp. So you can't really park there. If we can expand the facilities, we would put handicap parking there, handicap accessible bathroom. And that's what we're working on. That's why we gave them the $50,000 to get started. We know there'll be more matching there. But that's why we started this Siletz versus had funds that when we talked to ODFW and asked for more hatchery fish, and they said, we don't have money. We said, we have. If we talked to State Marine Board about doing stuff, you guys would say, hey, you got to come with matching funds. We'd say, here's $100,000, here's our matching funds. We want to provide more fish, more access for all users. And like I said, ADA is very important for us.
Great, thank you.
Running out of time, I got a question for you guys.
Sorry.
You guys have, no, you're good. You mentioned for them to work at, so you guys know, after Marine Board meeting, told them last month, the month before, I looked down the February, and I went this way, I might smoke it to smoke it around as well. So we do that. Just want to reassure you of that. Couple questions based off of what you said today. You mentioned the uniqueness of that town flow, right? In those few seconds. Scott, that you were mentioning shuttle service. When I think shuttle service, I think non-motorized, right? That's just the way my brain works in my background. So to me, that seems like a really unique non-motorized opportunity that probably a lot of folks take advantage of. But put it in one site, going down, you got a nice sort float and what do we say? 27 mile river.
It's a 7-mile river section where you can walk half a mile back.
So I'm not spending time on the river in summer months. I think based on comments you shared in the river statistics, that was probably a pretty heavily used non-motorized section. Am I wrong?
In summertime, it's too low to run boats, so you're absolutely correct. So you're gonna be a lot of kayak, inner tubers, use some of that, yes. So it's self-regulated.
But the shuttle service does, I would say 90% of the shuttle service business is by use of motorboat users. Because we're not drifting, we're putting it up above using the small kicker motor to navigate down the river. Because there's a lot of big long front ponds, there are spots that, it would take you 20 minutes to row a section of river to get through it. Or you could put down a motor and get through it in 5 minutes. So that's why motors.
I'm thinking the motors can get you back up, is that what you're?
No,
Okay, yeah.
It's my mind goes to non-motorized.
Sure. So the town loop is very well used by both motorboat users and non-motorboat users. It's already the deadline that ODFW uses for our fall Chinook and our coho season. So you wouldn't have any extra pressure because it's already a deadline. It's already well established. Everybody knows what the bridge in the park looks like. We wouldn't be creating new things.
You guys talked about all the investments that you made on that. Well, very much appreciate. Can you give me a sense? I'm assuming there's members in your group that are not motorized users.
Absolutely. We have members make that work, sorry.
That would continue to use that section of the river, should be restricted or whatnot. And it's probably safe to assume, I would think, you could continue to make investments, maybe just in a different form and match the non-motorized funding that's out there. I don't know, what do you think on that?
We do have one non-motorized board member that we brought in specifically because they have different views than all of us. And that kind of stuff. I foresee that we would probably discontinue our Siletz and worse motor uses.
That's fair enough, that's what I'm trying to get at.
But it's unfortunate.
So just a clarification, following up on Steve's, because my mind, when I think of shuttles, I think of certain other activities too. So in the case of how you guys use it, you personally would take your boat to a place. If you're like doing the town, you would take it to the start. You would get in your boat, somebody would get in your vehicle, drive your vehicle to a parking area. You do the float and you walk back to your vehicle, you go pick it up. Is that right? Okay, cool.
You leave them $30 in their ashtray and they come pick it up, off they go.
Awesome. Member Messett, do you have any questions for the SAA folks?
Hi, everyone. Not as much of a question, but more of an acknowledgement of just and thanks for you guys for coming out and testifying and acknowledging that there is room for compromise. I love that that kind of became part of the theme of all this, and I think that's how we're going to be able to move forward and have, you know, all the stakeholders involved in this not be totally happy, but understand and look through a lens that's maybe a little different than what they're looking at. I think the deadline up at Illahee makes a lot of sense based on everything that you guys said. You know, better facilities overall. I like the safety aspect, getting in line with the existing fall Chinook regulations. That just seems like an excellent deadline if we were to adjust the current ruling and move on from there. That we can look at that as somewhat of a compromise. That's all I have.
I think it's also worth noting too that it seems pretty drastic to go from full motor usage to full closure in just a short period of time here. If we were to adopt one of the compromises that we've come up with, if that does not work for the community and the people, then we could always revisit this rule later. But as we all know, once they're all gone, they're going to be all gone forever. So I think it's a pretty drastic measure to just go from having, you know, all these options for users. As we know, the majority of the user groups use them or something reverse. So to restrict, let's say 80% of the user group in a short period of time when we could reduce it, come up with a compromise, and then if that doesn't work, then we can revisit this down the road. But it just seems like pretty drastic to just shut it all off.
Understood. Yeah.
I just wanted to apologize to Member Messett. We didn't get slides and stuff made. I didn't hear until yesterday that that was an option, and so we brought handouts, and I didn't realize that I wasn't able to hand you the handouts I handed out to everybody else, so I apologize.
I'm guessing that Jennifer can
Chair,
make some copies. And
Chair Jackson, this will be, anything handed out, this for everyone, board and members of the public, will be scanned and available on our website since it's a public meeting, and we'll make sure Member Messett gets it specifically.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for coming out today.
I've been to those ramps too, so I agree. All right.
And our next group will be the Confederated Tribe of Siletz Indians. One thing I forgot to mention, when
And if it gives, yeah, if it gives you trouble, I'll be your clicker.
one thing I forgot to mention when I opened the meeting is, on behalf of the board, our staff and our board, we want to express our condolences to the family and friends of the gentleman who died in the river over this past week. I'm sure that there's some people in this room who may have known them. And again, it's really very sad about the situation that happened. You guys are ready to do your presentation, so let's do it.
More chairs. I'm gonna stand up for most of it. Let's just hand them out to all on board and then they're ready. Shut up.
So before you start, if you could just run down through the row of presenters, introduce yourselves.
No worries. So my name is Dylan Gorman. I'm employed as a biologist here with the Siletz Tribe. And just so you have some background on me and my knowledge to be up here, kind of, because I'm going to be rolling through most of the slides. I run the hunting and fishing program at the tribe. I have a master's degree in fisheries science from Oregon State, and before I finished that degree program,
as a charter fishing guide. So here locally in Oregon and then also in, up in Alaska a little bit. I did that for about 10 years, held the US Coast Guard captain's license. That's enough about me. So you guys want to run through, introduce yourselves?
I'm Stan Bandy, Weathering Biological Programs Manager of this tribe. Been with the tribe just under 30 years, 5 years.
Hi, my name is Bud Lane from Vice Chairman of the Siletz Tribal Council. Also a resident of Siletz. I've lived on that loop from PD to Hillside Park for approaching 50 years now.
My name is Buddy Lane, also a Siletz Tribal Council member. I'm Cultural Resources Manager for the Confederation Tribes of Siletz, and I have lived in Siletz as a resident for 18 years of my life, but I also still live in town, going on 42 years now. And an active fisherman, hunter and user of, resources we have in that area. So good to be here.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, we also have Angela on. We have our administrative assistant Siobhan here and then another tribal council member here.
Great about you.
So jumping in here, and I'm going to be running through the slide deck. Some of us are going to be talking at different times. And then please feel free, if there's questions, if you want to ask them while you go, I don't know if that's proper protocol, but feel free. And what we're going to start talking about here is just CTSI's original petition. And when it comes to this petition, we have discussed at length, all of us, staff, tribe members, the concerns over motor use on the Siletz. Right? And a lot of those concerns that we've discussed at length, the impacts to sensitive life stages of salmonids, erosion, water quality, impacts to all of the other organisms, aquatic organisms in the river. Right? We have discussed those impacts so extensively that OSMB staff have acknowledged them. And they submitted into the public record in the April board book a recommendation to adopt CTSI's original petition, right? To restrict motors upstream of channel. And for reasons that we still don't fully understand, that recommendation was changed and the board chose not to acknowledge that original recommendation. So what we're here today is to present some additional information to help OSMB, board and staff, make an informed decision. Right? And this information is related to CTSI's original petition. And it's really going to focus on safety, conflict, and congestion. Right? To date, these topics have been discussed and limited. They have limited discussion because we have not had sufficient data, right? Data that looks at the types of boats on the river, the types of motors, the types of user groups. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to just present a little information, staff perspective here on kind of the history of the petitions and what historically we have heard from the Marine Board. And then give some insight into a motor observation study that CTSI has been conducting over the last, give or take, about a year. So first things first, kind of the history of these motor petitions, right? And so we actually have staff. Stan, he's been here for a long time. He's participated in a lot of the previous petitions, right? There's tribal members that we've interviewed and just talked with that were a part of those earlier iterations of the petitions, right? The ones in the earlier 2000s. We've conducted extensive interviews with people that were involved in those petitions as petitioners. And historically, what the Marine Board has said back to staff here and others is that motor use on the Siletz River is light. If you go back and you look at the public available records of OSMB policy analysis at the times of those petitions, motor use was so light that it did not justify any action from OSMB board. The motor use was so light, it was not affecting the safety, congestion, or any conflict on the river. not justifiable at this time. And I think the people that were involved in those petitions took that to heart. They said, look, OSMB, you are the authority. We trust you. So that's where we're at. Not justifiable, we're gonna move forward. But we're gonna put forward some education campaigns. If you fish the Siletz River, you have seen this sign. Actually, the individuals that created that sign are right here today. If you look at that sign, you can see CTSI right on there. There's the newest iteration of the Respect the River campaign. Beautiful sign. Thank you, Marine Board, for putting it up. There's also the Siletz River Etiquette User Guide. Lots of time, effort, energy went into producing this. OSMB supported it right there. If you go down to Hee, which I did the other afternoon, it's still posted on the kiosk at that moment. But unfortunately, these education campaigns have not produced a positive result for all the users of the river. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here right now with another petition. And so what have we heard? What have we seen? I fished the river a lot. I was a charter guide for a long time. Still fish a lot, go out there for field work. We talk, interview many people, tribal members, community members. What we hear is that since the last petition, traffic's gotten worse. Certain user groups have gotten larger. There's more congestion, there's more conflict, and that all of this is impacting the safety on the water. That people aren't feeling safe up. But it's difficult to talk about this stuff without data, right? And I think that is what's really limited this discussion up until now. And so we recognize that, and we want to provide the best information to you as a board, you as staff. So that's why we engaged in this study. You've been provided with a copy. There's going to be electronic copies that we're submitting today as well. The full raw data, video, Excel files, you're more than welcome to access that. If you request it, we can make that available to the appropriate state agencies and NGOs. But right now, we're just going to go through. I would encourage you to read it. We're not going to be able to go through everything in the study, so we're just going to hit the high points. Kind of the methods that we use. So what we did is we selected a time to observe boaters when we knew that there would be enough water in the basin to allow for full fish migration and that there would be full angler participation. We timed that around a good October rainstorm when we knew people would be out. We selected a location within the original petition area, upstream of Jack Marine Park, a couple miles on private property, and we deployed several video trail cameras there. This is a sampling technique that's very common in restoration monitoring. It's called photo point monitoring. We just modified it to a video point monitor. And then we set out additional cameras to test the efficacy of our main sample site. And our cameras were very efficient at picking up boaters. In fact, the only time we did not pick up boaters on those cameras was when they were operating in very low light or near dark conditions, or if there was extreme fog. However, all of those boaters we didn't pick up, we eventually recaptured when there was either more light and they came downstream, or the fog came. The data that we collected was a 20-second video clip. And from that video clip, we were able to analyze the data. So staff at CTSI physically sat down and watched all of the videos that we collected. It was about 160 videos of boaters. And from that video, we were able to collect the date, the time of the day, the boat type. Was it a sled? Was it a drift boat? Was it a canoe, kayak, so on? What user group was it? And we identified 4 main user groups: non-motorized charter guide, motorized charter guide, motorized recreational user, and non-motorized recreational user. And then we also wanted to look at some safety metrics too. And for this, we just used the national standard the same metrics that the US Coast Guard uses in their national recreational boating statistics, PFD wear rate, and then we also looked at ECOS, which is not a fan of this acronym, it's engine cut off switch. I'm gonna just call it a kill cord from here on because that's what I know it. It's that little red cord that's hanging down on your tiller handle. Or if you have a non-tiller steer, it might be on your throttle linkage, right? So if you fall out of the boat's not gonna spin around and hit you. It's called the circle of death by the Coast Guard, but not a good thing. And then we also looked at group size, right? How many total occupants were in the boat? And this is just a little snip of our data sheet. Again, like I said, we can make that available and provide that. And then this is what staff would be looking at as they went through these videos. So kind of go through this quick, little blurry. These were screenshots. We had to blow them up. When we were watching the videos, it's nice, high quality 1080p. We could slow it down and bring my. So this boat operator was identified as a non-charter guide, so recreational boater. We could see the transom of his boat. There was no sticker. Was wearing a PFD. Didn't have a motor. We did not collect data on the occupants' PFD wear rates in the boat. We were time limited. It's something that we would like to go back and do. We just haven't been able to publish any of that data. Here we have this operator looks like he might be a charter guide. Staff actually identified that's not a guide sticker. I think it's a sporting team sticker. So this person was identified as a recreational boater, motor user, not wearing a PFD, not wearing a kill cord. You can actually see this slide was a little bigger. The kill cord's bunched up right there on the near the tiller handle, and there's 4 occupants in the boat. So there were some unknowns where we couldn't identify if a kill cord or motor or whatnot was being used, and those were labeled as unknowns and included in the data. All right, so what were our major findings? I would highly encourage you to read through this study. There's many findings in it. We're just going to touch on the major ones. And I know there's a typo on this slide. I caught it after I emailed it yesterday. Major finding 1, non-motorized recreational boat operators were observed to have the highest wear rate of PFDs among all user groups, 46%. Major finding number 2, motorized charter guides, the most educated, credentialed, and largest user group on the river, have the lowest safety metrics of any user group. We did not observe a charter guide wearing a PFD. We did not observe a charter guide wearing a kill cord, 0%. We also identified that charter guides made up the largest user group at 51%. Now, it's really important to keep in mind, if you are using a motor on the Siletz, it's a federally navigable waterway. You are required to have a US Coast Guard license. So that means that you have been trained by the Coast Guard, to have a captain's license, they're licensed to the Marine Corps. So you have the most education and the most training. The 2 most common observed motor sizes, 0 to 10 horsepower, 73% of motor users. So that's your 8, 9, 9 drift boat kicker motor stuff. The next largest category was the 90 to 150 horsepower at 17%. And major finding number 4 is the best available data demonstrates a sharp increase in motor use on the Siletz above Morgan over the last 25 years. So that's using OSMD's policy analysis, using our data, that this user group has grown. Yeah, please. Yeah.
This study they did was on what time period?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that, and it's listed on the front, but it's over about a 26-day period from October, I think 29th till about the end of November. And we outlined in the study, hey, this is just representative of the time that we were observing. You know, it's not meant to extrapolate out to larger time periods. It's just, this is what we observed in that time.
So this major finding, I'm assuming the 26-day study doesn't have a correlation to historical use of rivers in the last 25 years. So where did you get that data to substantiate this major finding?
From the Marine Board.
But like, in some examples.
Well, so if you actually go back here, there was a.
Sorry, I just got.
No, you're fine.
I haven't had a chance to review it.
Oh man, this is really small. So right here, Marine Board used, what is it? Statewide boating survey data. That was the best data available.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just trying to find out what the word is.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a question in terms of numbers as well.
Yeah, shoot.
So going on page 5, you mentioned the distribution of motor use versus sled boats versus drift boats. And then on page 6, you're saying that the majority is the motor use. Are you is there any distinction between what type of motor there? Or are you assuming that all?
Actually don't have that. Here.
So what I'm just asking about here is the drift boats, and sleds. Drift boats, are you always assuming that they are not motorized, or are you assuming that they have motors attached to them?
No, this was just looking at both type, but not motor versus non-motor.
Okay, then how do you get the total motor width? So total motor, but on this side, the drift boats are the larger percentage.
Because this includes sleds as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that's including drift boats with a motor and sleds.
But not all drift boats have a motor. Thank you.
No, great questions. Any other questions here? Yeah. All right. All right. I can't remember.
I think you're up to major finding number 3.
No, we did four.
Yep.
So I think that's it. That's all we're gonna cover here on the study. Again, I would encourage you to read through it. It is publicly available, so anybody can check it out. And if anybody would like to view that data, state agencies, NGOs, you can reach out to us. So we can accommodate that. All right, now we're going to transition here a little bit, and Siobhan has a couple of memos that we're going to hand out that are related to CTSI's major concerns. We're not going to cover all of those, but we wanted them submitted in the record. And we're just going to go over the main ones, which we've kind of already touched on today: safety, conflict. She's going to pass those out.
1 second.
All right, I'm gonna just kind of jump in here as she's passing these out. And so, there's been public testimony suggesting that motors are making boating safer on the Siletz, right? But if you go and look at the U.S. Coast Guard 2024, which is the newest data you can get, national boating statistics, of documented boating fatalities, 47% occurred with an open motor, compared to 26% from paddle. From our own study on the Siletz River, we observed the largest user group disregarding best safety practices, not wearing PFDs, not wearing kill bolts. 0%, which is well below the national average for PFD and kill bolt wear. So it just appears there might be a disconnect here on this river, right? Public comment indicates motors are making users safer. National data, our data, is showing that motor use is less safe. So is it that motors are giving a false sense of security on the water? Is it giving users the comfort to disregard best safety practices requiring a PFD? To operate in water conditions that might be inherently unsafe, like very high flows? It's difficult to accept safety advice from a user group that so widely disregards best practices. Right, best practices that OSMB, US Coast Guard put out there, national campaigns, national voter, Voter Safety Council. Right, the Fit to Flow campaign, which I've actually been a big fan of and following because I'm a fan of Sawyer Orange, and I know they're a partner on that. Should other river users be subjected to the unsafe practices of another user group? Non-motor operators deserve a space to recreate without being impacted by unsafe users, right? People that want to feel safe out on the water deserve a space to. And to address some of the points earlier about, and I know Alan really left the door open on this one, about, hey, we could move up to he at the last board meeting, the deadline. That's been discussed heavily. And so what that would do is it would not allow users an area to recreate and fish for fall Chinook, so they wouldn't be subjected to these unsafe practices that we've observed. The last point I want to make here is just this river, the Siletz, it needs a strong voice on safety. There have been at least 3 fatalities in the last 3 years, one every year. One very recent, right? And so I just think that it's something that we really need to be cognizant of and promote. All right, conflict. We have already talked about this at length. I'm not going to dive into it too much. If you haven't already watched the video that we produced, please watch it because it is in the words of the people that are being impacted mostly. So let's community members. And then also go back and look at OSMB's records. Public records requests, conflict present on the Siletz. OSMB staff are indicating that conflict is here. And you can go back and look at all of the additional information we've submitted. Congestion. There is public testimony that there is no congestion on the Siletz. Now, we would qualify congestion as overcrowding. Excessive accumulation that hinders the natural flow. Most of the factors that contribute to congestion are human related. Got to flip the page. Competition for access to fishing spots. Rerunning fishing holes, rerunning sections of the river, running down through sections of the river to beat other people to fishing locations. That was just submitted. We have to get through the frogwater faster. Get down. Imagine if you're a boat trying to row through that and you have another boater haul up right by you, beat you down there. Not following the rules of the road, right? And that could be allowing the boat that's coming downstream the ability to pass as you're holding in the current. Giving way to that downstream vessel. People that want to keep motors on this river have submitted in public testimony that they engage in these exact activities. And when that user group, which we've shown, has increased, it's now 89%. And we've seen on the upper river from Logan Ellis' data, 81% from his observed time period, that those activities are going to occur more often. It's going to cause more congestion. Go back and look at the record, the public testimony. These behaviors are outlawed. It's not allowing for the normal flow of traffic on the river, especially for non-motorized users. And I just want to, oh shoot, what did I hit? And we just want to remind you that you all have the authority to do something about this. Right? You have the statutory authority to make regulations consistent with safety, consistent with congestion, conflict. You can do something about this problem. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Stan because he has a lot more extensive knowledge on this and some of the funding in the basin. And sit down.
Stand right here.
All right.
So, I'll make this pretty quick. We just wanted to highlight some of the past testimony, and I think we heard more about this topic of funding today. Marine Corps staff Janine presented a good bit of information, and our main point here, which I think we're just reiterating a portion of what Marine Corps staff presented today, is that the fees associated, all the claims of the lack of funds being generated when motors are put off of this river or restricted on this river are, number one, all of our operators that are providing testimony fish multiple rivers. So right out of the chute, they're still going to be licensed. Those funds still go into Marine Corps pots. They're still available. Yes, they can't be designated at that particular ramp. These ramps we're talking about within some of these funds, but Marine Board is still generating those funds. Secondly, when you look at the funds that have been provided to date, we reached out to the Marine Board and to the county, and I've realized today in listening to Janine's talk and description that what we got from the county might have been a misrepresentation in where they were allowed to use that money or where they are using that money. But the short of it is they have an $800,000 annual budget for 15 parks. 13 of their parks have ramps. Their application for their MAG maintenance assistant grant was for $31,500. When we split that up, that gives you $2,194, I believe it is, per ramp per year. Their budget, if you take 800,000 divided by the number of the parks and 15, if I'm remembering all my math here, you basically get about $53,000. So when you look at those numbers, if you use the 8 ramps that we used in our memo to you for the cost to maintain those, you end up with about a 4% amount of contribution from the MAG, the maintenance assistant grant at this point in time. It's my understanding that those grants tend to roll over, but we were unable to get an answer as to yes, the county could expect to continue to attain those grants each biennium as we go into the future. I want to make a point that Janine made as well about the broader need, the big picture need for working on any of these ramps, and they're big dollars. So the Marine Board works hard to attain money. They work hard to create grant opportunities, but there are limitations there. There's ceilings, and based on Marine Board staff this morning, which your presentation that you heard, it only contributes a portion of the overall need. So we believe that it's misrepresentative to say that, hey, if we lose motors, we're going to be losing a lot of funding here. The reality is that big pots of money are needed, and whether we allow motors in this section of the river or we don't, we're still all collectively going to have to apply a lot more money. The tribe puts in for grants on an annual basis. I don't know if our time's up. We had some questions. I don't know if we do have time to finish.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay.
It looks like you've only got maybe 2 slides left, so it's got to.
Yeah. So the Flex grants, has been, is successful at achieving grants. We operate on millions of dollars a year of grant funding. We stand ready to work with all of the partners to fix these ramps. So we just think the justification that the sky's going to fall, we aren't going to have any more ramps, ramps are going to slide in, people are going to die. That's not the conversation we should be having. It's how do we get together? We, the tribe, can help with those funds, those required funds, and the funds that are being looked at to date and continue to be described in testimony, we think have been overrepresented. With that, I'll sit back down and everything just right.
Yeah, that was.
I had something I just wanted to share too. When we developed this this approach, it was thoughtful, and it had all these meetings with the exception of one. It's been a long process. This isn't a shock to the system, although some people think it might be portrayed that there's 26 miles of the Siletz River would not be affected if voters would be able to run as they are today with little to no regulation from Jack Morgan County. We looked at, and I know OSMB has a specific, I've learned a lot in this process, a very narrow kind of scope of authority they have. That Oregon is, one of the only states without a natural resources department that's overreaching, so there are these little kingdoms. And you all have one, and yours is over safety and conflict and things on the waterway, and of course the FNW over wildlife, the fisheries. And so our petition mentioned many things. We looked at where spawning happens. Of course, this is the most used part of the river for folks who don't use motors, and who do use it. It's the most heavily trafficked. Probably the only comparable part would be the mouth. But I listened to folks talk about markers, and in the early 2000s, Ojala was used as a marker for the fishing limit because of the spawning beds that happen for salmon and steelhead above it. And people are talking about Italy. We've made that leap quite quickly in my mind from the last meeting to now, but I think Ojala is well worth consideration. I believe we have compromised with our petition and some of the resources in the river. We hold this thing to be sacred and not just ours. And we've contributed millions. We talk about everyone wanting fish, but putting hatchery fish in the river is just one element of a big mosaic of things that have to occur. It does nothing if the riparian zone and the estuary and the river system isn't being addressed. And we've done decades worth of work and investment, and we are not going to take our ball and go home if it really doesn't go our way. We are going to continue to do that work, and this is a very small step in addressing what is something that has just been left to its own devices for a long time. And I've also read through past petitions, and it is really your OSMB's own words that reason action wasn't taken is because there was little to no traffic on the Flood River. And no one would agree that that is not the case today. That has radically changed. And the ways in which folks use the motors and use the river via motor and aggressively go up and down and frankly haul butt to get to places with little to no regard with bank fishermen, folks on the waterway, or what they're doing to the river system itself. So this was thoughtful. It was well laid out by us, and we took great pains and tried to arrive at something that we thought was a reasonable approach to a problem that exists. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out today. I really appreciate all the work that you put into generating some board members about stuff. I got one quick question. I'm going to check in with our board members about questions, and then we'll move on to ODFW. This is for Dylan. You were mentioning that the use of the trail cams and that you had 160 videos. Was that over the 26-day period?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
We actually had many more, like thousands, because anytime, say, like a branch went down the river or whatever.
Right.
So that,
But you identified 160.
but of those, 160 of them were with.
Member Message, do you have any questions?
Not at this time, thank you.
Said them earlier.
Thank you.
Well, I have one. Don't count me out.
All right.
So, Michelle, I guess, listening to your study, very good data, and very interesting videos.
It was the entire staff.
What I boiled down after listening to that was kind of the position that was developed off of that study is because motorized voters don't follow established safety protocols to the extent as half of non-motorized users, we should restrict this section of the river. What I'm kind of struggling with in my head, and I'm just looking for feedback, because I'd love to hear your position on this. How would we, as board members, be expected to use that data to look at the entire states, right? What if there's probably been no study? If there is, Brian knows about it, he's the expert and stuff. But what if those statistics hold true in general statewide? Then are we, as a board, under that logic that you developed, expected to apply that elsewhere? State is. You see what I mean?
Yeah, why don't you go, and I have some stuff that I do.
One reason we've tried to frame the conversation with those data the way we have is that, let's go back to public testimony, time and time again. We've heard that without a motor, I can't A, without a motor, I can't B, I can't C. And much of that has also involved in the conversations about it's unsafe. I'm unsafe without a motor. You've heard testimony from individuals that say they have, I don't know if the one gentleman said he was actually handicapped, you know, in some way recognizes that or not, but he basically described that he won't be able to operate. And we've heard other instances wherein somebody has described, well, I helped this boat, I prevented them from a tragic accident, or I prevented this, or I can't do this under these conditions. What we're saying is, well, if we're blessing the operation, the mode of operation now, we're blessing a mode that's not being safe, that not following existing rules and guidance. So to accept testimony that says, in the spirit of having a motor, we're telling you, the community, we agree with you. We think this means you're safer. That water's moving fast, or you got to flip your boat around. We're ignoring that when you have a motor hanging off the back of a drift boat, you've got a lot more weight back there. You probably got a disproportionate distribution of that weight when you come to the river. You find in public testimony, conversations about and descriptions of boats sinking based on that, with some of our guidance there. So that's kind of where we, not kind of, that is where we.
So maybe I misconstrued the intent of that was the way I described it. Maybe after hearing that, maybe the intent was in a roundabout way to discredit the testimony that we received from motorized guys. Say, yeah, they're not safe. They're unregarded as probably could have listened to them.
If you want to use the word discredit, that's would be your.
Yeah, and we also, you know, looking at this, hey, there are certain operators that disregard best safety practices, which we've laid out. And, you know, I think it's fair for other operators that, based on our observation, are safer, have an area where they can recreate where they're not subjected to that thing. So whether, and look, this is just data, you can do with it what, with or without whatever you want. My role and our role here isn't to look at every body of water in this. You know, we are focused on Siletz.
I think too, I mean, different bodies of water, it's that different. I would imagine there are rivers where I'm getting is Siletz is pretty remote. There are lots of places where you're just not visible on the waterway. without someone putting cameras. I mean, I would imagine on stretches of the road or the Clackamas, Columbia, or Willamette, people will have eyes on you. Whole bunch of that waterway, so the behavior is probably different. So I would think extrapolating that way to apply, probably, you know, they're just different elements. We have different meanings on data.
All right, thank you guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
And our last presenters for the morning are folks from the FW. It is stuff.
Yes, it's funny. Thank you.
Yeah.
We're that.
You heard, I talked to just come.
Well, I think it's officially afternoon now, so good afternoon, everyone. I am the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife Mid-Coast District Fish Biologist. Today I have here with me Caleb Young, who is our Assistant District Fish Biologist, as well as Paul Atwood, who is our North Coast District Acting Watershed Manager, and Mike Dobbin, who is our West Region Manager. Today, we are just going to be presenting on some biological data for the board's consideration throughout this public proposal. So I'm the ODFW Dillon, that's the tribe Dillon, but I'm based out of Newport, right out of the office above the Pig and Pancake, actually. And to answer a question that's probably going to come up is, yes, it does smell like bacon all the time. I'll just stay with it. The mid-coast runs from the Salmon River in Otis down to the Siletz River in Florence, and that includes both Tocnitch and Siletz lakes. Our district office particularly deals with all things freshwater and fish related for the Mid-Coast District. And so that includes things like fisheries management, adult trapping and monitoring, spawning ground surveys, restoration work, in-water work periods, private timber work, estuary work, the salmon trout enhancement program, hatchery and trout stocking, and lake management, among a variety of other freshwater fish related things. Just for your awareness, we do have 5 staff on our district. We have a habitat biologist, a PFA biologist, a step biologist, an assistant, and a DP. We also work with a variety of partners to accomplish our work, to include the Siletz English Association, the Siletz Tribe, watershed councils, the federal government, and other state agencies. So today I'm going to be covering basically 3 main components. I'm going to give the board some context on the Siletz watershed, which you may or may not already know, and some backgrounds on fish and fish habitat and things like that. And then I'll go into kind of an ODFW management overview and some of the context behind, us presenting today, and address some of the further question, or address further the questions that the Marine Board has asked us in the past. And then I'll finish with some general fisheries data in the basin. So to start, I wanted to start to kind of get on the same page. I wanted all of us to be definitionally on the same page for salmon habitat and how the Siletz kind of houses a lot of different species. So ideal habitat for salmonids varies varies from species to species. And the Siletz Basin has a variety of suitable and diverse habitats that support rearing and spawning for 6 salmonid species and cutthroat trout and lamprey. Though each species has nuanced differences to their preferred habitat, generally speaking, all salmonid habitat consists of spawning gravel at fist size or lower, in-stream complexity, which includes deep cold pools, shallow riffles, slow-moving water, large woody debris, riparian shade and cover, in-water shade, clean cold water, and intact wetlands and estuaries. When I refer to spawning salmonids, I am referencing salmon that are seeking out a suitable location within their preferred habitat to build their Migrating salmonids, when I reference those, are moving throughout their natal river system to identify their suitable habitat to build their red. What's a red, you might be asking, which probably everyone in this room knows, but I figured, like I said, I would acknowledge it and get to the same definition. So reds are dug out by salmon to deposit their eggs, and males will then fertilize them. And more often than not, reds are dug out of pools, excuse me, out of the tailouts of pools. And reds have several key characteristics. So on the screen, I have a diagram of, my laser pointer disappears in the, all right, well, not gonna use that. So I do have a diagram on the screen of what a red looks like from the side view. So a couple key characteristics there. You have the bowl or depression, which is dug by, a pair of salmon, multiple salmon, to deposit their eggs into. And those are roughly up to 1 foot of depth. That obviously can vary quite a bit. They're dug into a tail out of a pool, which then has the tail spill of gravel behind it where the eggs are deposited. The gravel will be much lighter than the surrounding gravel because salmon are actively digging in it and moving algae and debris off of those rocks. And the sizes of reds will depend greatly on the species, which species dug it. River morphology matters a lot where salmon dig their reds. So again, I have a very simplistically put diagram of river morphology. At the top of the screen, you have a riffle, and then a pool, and then a tail out. And that kind of pattern really captures where salmon will build their reds. So they'll hold in those deep cold pools until they're ready to spawn. They'll move up into the tail outs and riffles, and that's where they will dig their reds. So the Siletz River itself, what's in the Siletz River? We have a variety of species, as I mentioned in the last slide. There's 6 salmonid species that call the Siletz River home. We have Chinook, coho, winter steelhead, summer steelhead, spring Chinook, and then of course we have chum as well, lamprey, and cutthroat. It is also home to a variety of other species within the basin, including silver spotted butterflies, bald eagles, spotted owls, marbled murrelets, giant Pacific salamanders, and freshwater mussels. The main stem Siletz River itself provides migration and rearing habitat for all of the native fish species I've just listed, as well as important spawning habitat for several of these species, particularly Chinook salmon and Pacific lamprey. The hydrology of the system is approximately 67.5 main stem river miles and has been recorded as low as 2.5 feet or 120 CFS and ranging up to 29 feet or 5,500 CFS. These are the recorded extremes in the basin, though several seasonal averages remain generally consistent year to year. The Siletz headwaters is part of the coastal mountain range, and due to a variety of wet weather, it's considered what we call a flashy system in our world, and that basically just refers to some really rapid fluctuations in CFS that can happen in the basin at a given time. I also thought it would be pertinent to cover the angling seasons in the Siletz River to provide some additional context for some of the conversations that we've had on deadlines and things like that. The Siletz Basin is open for fall Chinook salmon fishing between August 1st and December 31st each year. From August 1st through October 6th, it is open for retention up to the Ojala boat ramp, which we've already discussed. And from October 7th to December 31st, it's open from the mouth to the Illy's boat ramp. We, as an agency, we lowered and split that deadline about 11 years ago in 2014 in order to protect spawning salmonids from angling pressure above Ojala. Wild coho retention has been open the last several years on the Siletz, but the season dates do vary year to year, but generally speaking, it is open mid-September to mid to late October. Wild coho are ESA listed, Endangered Species Act listed, and federally controlled fisheries. ODFW manages those fisheries at the state level and presents our staff recommendations to NOAA NIMS each year to determine if a fishery will be allowed. Hatchery steelhead retention is open year-round up to the falls, which is at approximately river mile 64.5. And wild and winter and summer steelhead retention is closed year-round. Spring Chinook retention is open, but unlike its counterparts in the fall, they are open for 2 salmon for the season from April 1st through July 31st and 1 a day. And finally, trout opens May 22nd and runs through October 31st. So as I previously stated, there's a year-round presence of salmonids in the basin, up to a variety of 6 salmonids. So I figured I would go over just a general overview of the run timing of those species. So the run timing can obviously vary year to year, but they generally remain within certain windows. Fall Chinook enter the system in August through December, with peak migration and spawning happening between September and November. And their habitat includes main stem spawning and larger tributary spawning. Coho enter the system between September and January, with peak migration and spawning happening between November and December. And their habitat includes smaller to medium tributaries and some main stem and smaller, slower water. Winter steelhead enter the system as early as November through April, with peak spawning and migration in February through March. And their habitat includes limited main stem, medium to larger tributaries, and generally a bigger variety of where they end up spawning due to weather restrictions like CFS in the basin. Spring Chinook and summer steelhead enter the system May through September, with peak spawning in September through November, and their habitat includes a combination of main stem and larger tribs. So on the graph there, I have listed out kind of just a piecemeal that covers the year round. I thought that was a good way to kind of represent that there's a pretty consistent presence of one type of salmonid throughout the year. It's also worth mentioning that there is a small population of chum salmon, but those are mostly tidewater spawners, and they spawn in places like Cedar Creek and Skunk Creek as well. These migration windows and spawning windows are dictated by a variety of environmental factors, including weather, temperature, the hydrology and CFS, river level, and other olfactory triggers. I did include the average river heights during those time periods where salmon are spawning or migrating. So in that fall time period, we see an average height of 4.5 to 6.5. During the winter time period, we see an average height of 5.5 to 6 or 8.5, sorry. And then through the summer months, we see an average heights of 2.75 to 4.0. I did include just a very general averages of heights and CFS on there, just to kind of indicate those yearly averages as they're associated with angling pressure, as well as fish movement throughout the basin. Those average heights obviously can be very influenced by unexpected weather events like droughts or big floods, but generally speaking, that's kind of where those time periods lay on the hydrograph and hydrology of the system. I will also note that this graph here only really represents the average run times for adult salmonids. It doesn't indicate juvenile presence, but juvenile presence throughout the system ranges pretty much throughout the whole time of year at various life stages, some more sensitive than others. And juvenile rearing habitat can be found throughout the system. And for everyone's awareness, which I'm sure everyone knows, juveniles migrate downstream at different times of the year. And they migrate downstream due to a variety of factors, including habitat quality, rearing density, predation, water temperature, and quality. So we did want to touch on some potential effects of a motor usage restriction or lack thereof. So currently, ODFW has not conducted any monitoring or research specifically focused on impacts to ecosystems from gas or electric motors on the Siletz River. However, potential motor effects could include impacts to main stem spawning Chinook, which are both fall and spring, and Pacific lamprey, migrating coho and steelhead, both summer and winter, and out-migrating smolts, which would be non-species specific. There have been studies in some riverine systems that have identified potential disturbances to salmon and steelhead reds, damage to stream banks and riparian zones caused by vessel wakes, noise pollution affecting wildlife, as well as contamination from fuel or other chemical spills that may harm waterbirds or other aquatic organisms. However, assessing these impacts can be very challenging, especially on a site-specific location like the Siletz, based on fish presence, types of boating equipment, timing of the disturbance, and the hydrology of the river system at the time of the study. The Siletz tribe did conduct and presented some information regarding some local demonstrations and local studies that they did on the Siletz River, which aims to illustrate some of the effects and potential effects that those motors could have to both spawning gravel and to the local community. The tribe has been gathering that information on boat-related impacts and has shared this information with the Marine Board. But in the absence of a formal study on specific impacts to fish and wildlife, OSMB might consider proactive actions until more information is available. Moving on to ODFW management. So ODFW, how does ODFW manage fisheries specifically in the Siletz Basin? ODFW has existing policies and plans in place that guide decision-making in fish management and hatchery programs. The fisheries management is primarily set through the Native Fish Conservation Policy, or the NFCP, and that is implemented through conservation plans adopted by the ODFW Commission. The NFCP conservation plans include population assessments and identify primary and secondary limiting factors for these populations. The three plans that generally guide the Siletz fisheries management are the Oregon Coast Coho Conservation Plan, which of course is specifically targeting ESA listed coho. The Coastal Multi-Species and Management Plan, the CMP, which specifically targets Chinook salmon, chum salmon, steelhead, and cutthroat trout. And finally, the Coastal Columbia and Snake River Conservation Plan for lampreys in Oregon, which of course targets Pacific lamprey and other native lamprey species. Finally, for hatchery programs, in the Siletz Basin, those are managed in accordance with federally approved hatchery and genetic management plans and department hatchery program management plans. As I stated earlier, the NFCP conservation plan includes population status estimates and also identifies primary and secondary limiting factors for those populations. So what are those limiting factors? Two of the primary ones that the NFCP identifies is lack of in-stream habitat complexity, and number two, the loss of off-channel habitat such as estuaries, wetlands, side channels, and floodplains. The department, along with a variety of aforementioned partners, conducts a range of other work in the basin that is aimed at including habitat restoration and addressing these primary factors. Some examples of that restoration work include Sam's Creek restoration, Sunshine Creek restoration, the Siletz estuary, which was driven largely by the Siletz tribe, the Drip Creek estuary restoration, and culvert replacements throughout the basin to meet fish passage guidelines and restore connectivity in the basin. The secondary limiting factors include harvest, water temperature, and sedimentation. And the Coastal Multi-Species Plan, or the CMP, addresses that harvest with a sliding scale harvest management framework. And this and other plans from our science-based management inform our science-based management to sustain species and their habitats for present and future generations. So to discuss hatchery stocking, currently, as mentioned already today, ODFW only stocks hatchery winter steelhead and hatchery summer steelhead in the Siletz Basin. Both programs are modest 50,000 smolt release, as stated earlier, and those are managed in accordance with federally approved hatchery and genetic management plans and department hatchery program management plans. Those hatchery seasons are open year-round for hatchery steelhead retention. Those individual hatchery programs were targeted at different angling opportunities to promote better angling opportunities. For summer steelhead, that broodstock program was mainly targeting bank angling opportunities, and for the winter steelhead, it was a combination of boat and bank angling opportunities, but primarily boat. For summer steelhead, we have a big presence of bank anglers who utilize the gorge, which is basically moonshine to the closure at the falls. So pretty high up to the system, and it's a really robust summer steelhead fishery up there. For harvest data, which was also mentioned, that is obtained through a combination of things, ELS, which is the electronic licensing system, conventional paper tags, or creel. And depending on the species, some harvest is more robust, some harvest monitoring is more robust, such as in fall Chinook and coho. They have had long established harvest data in the basin from the Coastal Chinook Research and Monitoring Program. Depending on the species, different levels of harvest data are collected. However, data on specific locations of catch types and boats used, with motorized versus non-motorized, are not collected for any of those species. The department has limited data on impacts of motor usage to harvest of hatchery fish, but ultimately could alter hatchery release programs based on an increased presence of hatchery fish on spawning grounds and according with the existing department management plans. However, other management options are available to the department other than just reducing a smolt release, such as changes to harvest limits, hatchery release locations, or increased trapping efforts in the basin. And the final portion of my presentation, I'll go over some general fisheries data. So here is a graph representing the Siletz River Fall Chinook escapement. This data set covers from 1986 to 2025, which is the most recent estimate. These data capture the fall Chinook escapement values for the Siletz Basin, and for everyone's awareness, escapement refers to salmonids who have reached their spawning grounds, and we assume are going to spawn once they get there. These data are in part how ODFW manages fall Chinook fisheries in the Siletz basins in accordance with the CMP. And without getting too into the weeds on how we manage that, there are associated escapement values with how we set those seasonal back limits in order to protect spawning salmon in each watershed. The escapement forecast, which would be like next year's, so 2026, the forecast for the following year's run must be above a certain level to have a fishery in that basin. Similarly to that last data set, here is the Siletz River Coho escapement. So this data set ranges from 1990 to 2024. 2025 was only just published like 2 days ago, so I didn't have a chance to add it into this graph yet. But that was roughly 8,892 coho for the season escapement for the Siletz River. As I mentioned earlier, coho are an ESA listed species. So these wild fish and wild fisheries are ultimately federally managed under NOAA and NIMS and Amendment 13. Amendment 13 is a commonly referenced framework adopted by the Pacific Fishery Management Council, which is then implemented by the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife at the state level. And we use Amendment 13 and other management plans as a guide in building staff recommendations for wild coho seasons on Siletz. Each year, the coho fishery is under a permanent regulation that it's closed until we open it for retention in each specific basin. This next graph, it can be a little bit confusing, but I wanted to include it just to kind of show some adjacent basin and as well as to cover winter steelhead estimates as well as fall Chinook and coho. But I do want to be very clear that this graph is not specific to the Siletz Basin winter steelhead. It is the mid-coast strata population estimates. So that covers, like I said, the Salmon River down to the Siletz River. So it's a combination of all of those river systems, winter steelhead populations. We do have, the department has limited data on specific winter steelhead populations in the Siletz Basin, but the Oregon Adult Salmon Inventory and Sampling Project, otherwise known as OASIS, does conduct specific spawning ground surveys in the basin to help derive these estimates. Those spawning ground surveys are used to create strata level population estimates for the entire mid-coast, again, Salmon River to the Siletz River, and the numbers here are the total mid-coast strata population estimates. I do want to point out, the trend line there. We're kind of at that stable point in winter steelhead populations, and this dates back to 2015. And finally, in order to cover data for pretty much each salmonid represented in the Siletz, I did include a 10-year total returns to the Siletz Falls, winter steelhead, spring Chinook, and summer steelhead. So for those of you who might not know, we have at Siletz Falls or Volsetz Falls, which is at river mile 64.5. We have a legacy trap located there. The trap is generally fishing from January through mid to late November or through early December every single year. And data are logged back through 1999 on actual trap caught estimates. We have multiple species that show up to the trap, including spring Chinook, winter and summer steelhead, coho, and Chinook. But spring Chinook, winter, and summer steelhead are the primary fish we see at the trap. Obviously, this provides a valuable resource across the mid-coast, including recycling fishing opportunities, broodstock collection, food share, fish redistribution, wild fish passage, refuge for summer steelhead, educational opportunities, and stream enrichment. And of course, data. So these data include, I do want to point out that these data do include both hatchery and wild totals at the trap. So it's a combination of every fish that passes through there. And also wanted to point out that the district uses the trap data as kind of a pulse point for monitoring species throughout the basin. But like I said, the Siletz Falls trap is located pretty high up in the system, but it is a barrier to fish passage during most times of the year. And so we do see almost every fish that comes through that area. And like I said, this is kind of just a snapshot of the data that we have. So I know it's a little bit hard to read up there, but the blue is winter steelhead, the orange in the middle is summer steelhead, and the green are spring Chinook in the basin. The 2026 season is still ongoing, of course, for summer steelhead and spring Chinook, but for winter steelhead, we saw a generally modest increase from last year with 91 hatchery winters and 93 wild winters at the trout. Okay, so I did want to say thank you to the Marine Board for providing ODFW with the opportunity to provide some additional biological context to this ongoing Siletz motor usage conversation. I also wanted to thank the Siletz tribe for being here today and presenting more information. And thank you to the Siletz Anglers Association for being here and presenting your information. We will continue to use creel surveys, spawning ground surveys, and other information to adaptively manage fisheries under the guidelines in existing plans. And that the department does not have specific data on impacts from wakes or propellers on boat motors in the Siletz River, though the agency does conduct creel surveys and those population and statement studies in the basin. These data suggest that salmon and steelhead populations in the Siletz River remain stable, and stable, of course, with the caveat and exception that other environmental factors such as ocean conditions, ocean survival, and habitat could affect population level salmons. That's all. Great.
Questions?
I do have a question, also to understand the larger picture with all the different users focused. On the last data sets, from what I've heard, if I'm understanding this correctly, the busiest time of the year to fish is during winter. And yet looking at the data, it seems like there are significantly more summer steelhead in the river and during the summer compared to winter steelhead. Can you just offer a little bit more, like a bigger picture as somebody who is trying to look at all sides, understand the ecosystem and everybody involved? Like, are in general summer steelhead a larger population than winter steelhead along this section of Oregon?
Good question. So I would start by saying, like, if you're looking at user groups in the river, like I said, with our creel data, we don't necessarily collect data on, boat usage, motor usage, that type of thing. But we do have a general idea of kind of how those fisheries move. And so above Jack Morgan, I would say, that's affected more because that's where the winter steelhead fishery really moves. We have a deadline at Illahee currently for fall Chinook and coho. And then above that is where, the steelhead fishery exists. We do see some pretty great returns year to year. Well, I wouldn't say great, but subjectively great returns for summer steelhead. But that can be due to a variety of different factors like smolt survival throughout the basin. Those fish summer steelhead being able to have a little bit more freedom of maneuver and not as weather restricted to reach that trap because it's really high up there. So a lot of times we have, operational restrictions at the trap where we can't operate it due to high winter flows. So it might not be quite as accurate, let's say, as a pulse point for winter steelhead as opposed to summer steelhead. So that's why we kind of use those data as that pulse point. It's not analyzed, it's not expanded in any way. It's just kind of for us to get an idea of like, okay, we're seeing a big number of summer steelhead or winter steelhead or spring Chinook this year. How does that compare to other years with similar weather patterns? That answers the
Yeah, and then I guess just to elaborate on one step further, in other rivers that have both winter steelhead and summer steelhead, is the population significantly greater with summer steelhead consistent through all the rivers, or does it very much depend on the ecosystems?
So correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, or Caleb, or Paul. Siletz River is one of the only systems that have a run of winter and summer steelhead. I think the Rogue, that has it. I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah, it's a very unique system that we have a native run of both summers and winters, and that's due we think is due to geez, I can't get that one out. We think that it's because of the fact that Siletz Falls exists as a volitional barrier. And so those winter steelhead probably came from at some point, or excuse me, those summer steelhead probably came from winter steelhead that made it up and over those falls at some point in history and established a population of summer steelhead in the basin. That's, just kind of theory, but that's probably why they exist in the Siletz Basin together.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Appreciate that.
Any other questions?
No, that's
Member Mesa, any questions for our representative from ODFW?
Sure. Hi, thanks for coming. Just talking about these deadlines again. So the reasoning behind the deadline for Chinook fishing is at Illahee. Is that for protections of spawning? Is it because most of the spawning occurs above that? And is that true for other anadromous fish?
So no, not necessarily. So the deadline shift was back in 2014 that I referenced was, it used to be open up to Illahee, and then they shifted that deadline down to Ojala for a portion of the fishery, so the first half of that. And that's partly to protect spring Chinook that are spawning above Ojala at a given time of year, as well as other fish species that are moving up there. But we do have, I guess, subjectively lower deadlines on the Siletz and in the mid-coast in general, and that is aimed at protecting all salmon species spawning.
Okay.
Anything
Thank
else? Anything else, Dax?
Nope.
Steve?
So we heard from the Siletz Anglers Association regarding how they participate in the summer.
Mhm.
Partners. And they had some concerns at Illahee with, the operational capabilities of them to be able to continue to support that. Can you, we heard one side of strategy, I'd love to hear from ODFW, how does Siletz Angler partner with you guys, and how do you think, saw a bullet in here on impacts of stocking, but apparently catch, she must have that. But there are impacts stocking, both goals, just
Actually, the picture on that slide, the middle one, is a picture of one of the fruit tanks that we have there. So some of that context, we have, so in 2026, I just looked, we distributed a total of 14 transport permits. And the majority of them are Siletz Anglers Association participants, Logan, Scott, Grant, kind of the whole group there. Depending on the year, we collect brood stock from the Siletz Falls Trap and also from the Angler Caught Brood Program. And generally speaking, year to year, from January through mid-ish March, a big portion of our brood stock collection comes from the guides who participate in of those 14 guides, or anglers in general that participate in the program and have a live well. We get a lot of the brood stock from them just because of how the trap is operating during that time of year. It can be very difficult to operate because of seasonal weather restrictions and things like that. The latter half of the season, going into the latter half of March and April, is almost entirely trap caught brood stock. And so I do want to, obviously give a nod to the anglers who participate. It would be very difficult to do it without their participation and their help in that program. But it's also difficult to definitively say, how we would adapt and change that brood stock collection program, given a lack of participation or a lack of motor usage in the basin itself. And in part too, it's hard to say definitively because we don't I don't send out a transport permit and ask if they're a motor user or not a motor user. They just, if they are part of the participation program, they can transport those fish. And then we do, we get a lot of anglers who participate in ad fish. So it's difficult to say for sure. I know Logan had mentioned that he had 37 fish, and I thought to myself, when my phone rings on a weekend, I almost always know it's Logan texting me about a fish during the winter brood stock season. And so like I said, it's difficult to say which one were specifically taken for brood, because we do get, a lot of fish that are added to those brood tanks. I also do think it's worth mentioning that those brood tanks that are in the river, they are mobile. They're not necessarily tied to that specific location. And so again, if we have to adaptively manage or adaptively change our methodology for collection, it is a possibility that we would have to really look at and examine where we would put those boxes in accordance with our brood program. But that being said, it is kind of a separate thing to the motor use versus the non-motor uses. And in our mind, we can adapt to what conditions are given.
Some questions very similar to yours, I got the answer I needed as well. With that, thank you very much for coming out today. And it's 20 after 1. We're going to adjourn until 3 o'clock when we'll start the public hearing.